Hello and thank you for listening to the Travis Talks Education Podcast. I am your host, Travis Smith. Welcome to episode 004 of the Travis Talks Education Podcast. Today's episode, all about the new NCAA Division I Diploma Dashboard, a database that was released on May 21st here recently that actually allows us, the user, to search academic majors of college graduates, both student athletes and the general student body. Now, don't get too excited. It is not so amazing that it can be an institutional thing. So I'm not comparing one school's athletes versus one school's non-athletes. But we do get to see trends of kind of a national overarching thing of Division I institutions. And the great thing is it's a longitudinal study. So it's got many years in there. And it's going to continue to grow. So now, once again, the NCAA research team just doing a great job being transparent and providing all this information. So I encourage you to go ncaa.org. Do not go to ncaa.com. A lot of criticism is, the NCAA, if you go to .com, you don't see anything about academics. Well, that's because all the academic information and the research is on ncaa.org. So I encourage you to go there. I'll find a lot of the information, a lot of research on there. If you just hover over the Division I academic piece, and it'll take you to everything that you could want to learn and more, especially if you are interested in researching the subject. A lot of the information is already readily available. You can search APR databases, graduation rate databases, and now the Diploma Dashboard. So today's episode just going to continue talking about the Diploma Dashboard, what it means, what the results I see, and some are alarming, some are to be expected, but going to compare back and forth, the more popular sports that are in the discussion of football and basketball, and then as a suggestion from the database where it says right on there that you'll probably get better results to use as a comparison if you compare either sport and or gender or race. And so we're going to do that in today's podcast and get you out of here early. Just wanted to talk about this new feature that, since it just came out on May 21st, wanted to get my opinion out here while it's fresh. Spent a couple hours playing around with the database and made some of my own notes, a little bit of spreadsheet information to go over with you. Now, today's episode, as always, is brought to you by AdvisEdu. AdvisEdu is a think tank company that I recently created where we're design thinking the future of NCAA Division I academics and its impact on the 350 schools, 32 athletic conferences, and 170,000 student athletes competing in Division I every year, and really focusing on how innovation in higher education can help student athletes before, during, and even after their college experience. And with the new academic revenue distribution coming out soon, the dollar amount per institution is going to continue to grow over the years. So there's going to be an increased responsibility to enhance the academic experience for all student athletes. We hear about that all the time now, talking about the academic experience and how can we improve things. And as I mentioned in the podcast, I don't get into paying players, and I probably never will on this podcast. It's an academic and higher education podcast. I'm not an expert in the economic piece, so I do what I think most people should do, and I just kind of stay in my lane based on what I do know, and that is kind of researching and having opinions on academic policy. If you want to hear more about what we're doing over at AdvisEdu, go to advisedu.com. That's AdvisEdu. There you can see the table of contents for the book that is in progress right now. We're kind of loosely tied to the podcast, and current events kind of dives through academic policy and the day-to-day version of how an academic advisor and an athletic department and an institution kind of focus on the NCAA academic policies and focus on how overall higher education is quite similar to athletics. You can also see the projects working on there. So just a little bit of those real quick. There's the previous podcast episode, Academic Transparency and the Recruiting Process. About to roll out an episode and white paper on National Degree Completion Program, similar to what the NFL uses. And then talking about NCAA Academic Digital Badges, credentials. So those things, you can learn more about it on the website. And as always, follow me on Twitter at Travis Higher Ed, and we'll continue the debate there off air. So with the rollout of the Diploma Dashboard, they did it for Division One and Division Two, and I do work in Division Two, so I've looked at that one too. But I'm really, for the purposes of the podcast and the think tank company AdvisEdu, really just focusing on Division One trends today. And I'm going to read a couple quotes from the release on NCAA.org. And this one is from Tom Paskus, Principal Research Scientist for the NCAA. It says, "We are proud to be able to provide this resource to our member schools as well as to the general public. This tool provides a new level of transparency to help others get a glimpse at the courses of study student-athletes choose." Now, I've met with Tom for research on my book and couldn't have been even more transparent. I mean, he was, him and his colleagues were just completely helpful. They were amazing. And I've said many times, NCAA.org, if you're going to be researching this topic or any topic in higher education focused on student athletes, or you're in the education space, higher ed, and you want to see some innovative approaches, really get on to NCAA.org. Look at some of the data points on there. But I really do trust Tom. And one of the things we talked about that day was how academic clustering is actually problematic to study, and it's hard to get that type of data. And I do believe academic clustering occurs, but it's hard to tell if it's a bad thing, or if it's just because these students are in similar sport, have similar interests, similar backgrounds. But he did tell me that it was very hard to try and find something you can back up with science to talk about academic clustering. But I do think this is about as close as we're going to get with this database for showing what graduated student athletes majored in. And I think that's the key word here, is graduated. So these are student athletes and students that are already being awarded the degree. So this, you don't have to worry about changing majors or anything like that, where academic clustering, you never know if you're pulling the major from the program support guide, the media guide, or on their website. And just in general, students change their major so far. So this was great to be able to see the trend. Now, interesting enough, in the release, the NCAA research staff did actually advise users to keep in mind that the demographics of the student-athlete population are different from those of the general student body. So they actually made the recommendation that when you're evaluating the data, that you disaggregate the data by gender and race. For example, compare black men in the general student body to the black male student athletes. And so with some of the results I'm going to talk to you about today and the reason behind them, in my opinion at least, that's what I did. So I compared, just for simplicity of the podcast, I chose football and men's basketball and compared it with white male, black male athletes, and then also both cohorts of the general student body, and then just overall the race and gender there. So to try and keep it limited, and the biggest results that I saw came from that. Key findings of the report, what I wasn't happy to see, unfortunately, is from what I found, the numbers were pretty staggering as far as differences. But when you look at the release, where a few findings from the report on NCAA.org, they just talk about female student athletes are more likely to major in STEM fields, but it was only a small percentage of a change. And so whenever things are that small, I don't really make a big deal out of it. If it's between 1% and 5% change, I don't think that's a huge deal. But when you get into doubling those numbers, as I'm going to talk about in a second, that's where I put it in perspective, and I think that is a key finding and a key takeaway. Now, the ones that are on here, I don't necessarily agree with. Now, overall, yeah, I agree with the fact this other one, rising academic standards have had little impact on student-athlete degree choices. I agree with that if you're going to talk about the overall Division I membership. But if we're going to once again take their advice and do it by gender, race, and sport, which I have, then the academic standards tell a different story based on what they're majoring in. So I just, I studied this in a different study while I was in grad school about 4 years ago, and I did it with as a project for the Miami Dolphins director of player engagement. He actually asked me to look at what NFL players in every 5 years. So we took 2000 2005, 2010, I think it was 2014, we took the rosters of every AFC East team that the Dolphins played in at the time and still do, took those rosters of all these male football players and then looked at the timeline. And it just happens to line up with the academic reform efforts of the NCAA. What I noticed was a growing trend. As we got closer and more recent, then all of a sudden the business went down, male football players. But as we got going with the looking at the data points of that study, it was very clear to me that as we got closer to the 2005, 2010, 2014, business majors altogether with football was going down, and social sciences is what I looked at. That was going up, and it was like an X on the screen when I looked at it with the data. And it just happened to correlate with the academic policies. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I actually am a big fan of progress towards degree, continuing eligibility certification. I think the policies are great, but I think we have work to do on campus of how to ensure that they don't steer students into certain majors. And that's what I'm seeing here. So the rising academic standards, saying that it has little impact on student athlete degree choices, I don't necessarily agree with this. Now, I'm going to focus on two categories. So we're going to focus on business major and the social sciences. And the reason being is that, for one, it's what I focused on in my research 4 years ago, so I already kind of had an interest in it. But you're going to see a trend in business. Business has, at most college campuses, has a great deal of credit hour requirements. So you're talking anywhere between maybe 60 to 75 credits. And then versus social science, where you might only have as little as 30 to maybe 45 to 50, not much more than that. And why that's a big deal is the way progress towards degree is factored in is you have allowable electives. So you add up your gen ed or your core, what have you, and then you add the major, but almost every college degree requires at least 120 credit hours. So when you're factoring in a business and you have your gen ed core, you only have a little amount of allowable electives, is what we call it. But in social science, those majors, in general studies, you have a lot, because if you're only doing 45 credits for the core, 40, and you're only doing 30 to 40 credits of the major, you're looking at almost 40 credits of allowable electives. And if you're a JUCO transfer for one of these sports, then I think you're more likely to be in social science if you're going to graduate, because if you come in as a business with all those requirements, and then transferring in credits is difficult to match up, you're not going to meet progress towards a degree, because you're going to be off, your trajectory is going to be off of your graduation timeline. And if you're a social science, though, you can get the most out of all those credits that you're transferring in. I see this a lot in baseball, because baseball is such a prevalent sport that transfers from not just one institution but multiple, kind of jumping across to different schools, and you don't want to lose credits every step you go. And so I looked at business and social science for that. But what I wanted to do was look at black male athletes, black male general student body, black male football, black male men's basketball, and the same thing for white male athletes, white male general student, white male football, and white male men's basketball. And when you look at it, the business, I'm going to just talk mainly about 2015-16, but because the trend, I looked at the data from 2008, 2009 academic year all the way through 2015, 2016, the most recent on the database, and you're going to see a big telling story and a big gap in business. So listen to these numbers, and like I said, you can find this on the website ncaa.org. Look at the press release. I'll link it up to the podcast episodes so that you can kind of see what I'm looking at. But in 2015-16, of those graduates, the black male general student body, 25% were business graduates. Okay, now black male athletes in general was only 15, so you're looking at 10% lower. And then black male football, it's 13%, so 12 percentage points lower. Black male basketball is 16, so 9 below the average of the campus. Now, we talked about in the release that the study findings was a very limited, showing that women athletes are more likely to be STEM majors, and that was a key finding. I think this is a pretty key finding, that that our black male athletes are actually at a much lower rate than black males on the campus. They're also higher in the social sciences than the black male general student body. Not as much, but you look at 19% of black males graduate with a social science category, and then black male athletes had 22, black male football 23%, and black male basketball was only at 19%. And comparing these numbers to the student body, so there we already see some discrepancy on the black males on campus compared to what you would call the revenue generating sports of football and basketball, and then just all the black male athletes. Now compare it to white males. So white males, the business was 29%, so the general student, versus 29 of black male general students, so not a big difference, right? But it's actually more an increase in graduates from white male athletes. So white male athletes, 34% had business degrees, 31% white male football, and 34% white male basketball. So you're much more likely, if you're a white athlete in Division I, especially at football and basketball, you are a lot more likely to be in a business major versus a social science, because we look at the numbers here. The white males on the general student for social science majors in 2015-16 was only 15%. White male athletes was really consistent. It was 16%. White male football, still pretty high at 20%, and then 12% for white male basketball. So all those numbers are lower than the black male general students, black male athletes, and then the business is higher. So these numbers just kind of stuck out to me. So let's go back to the business. So if you are a white male athlete, you are at 34% versus 15% if you're a black male athlete that you're going to be a business graduate. Same thing, same trend with football. So if you're a white male football player, 31% versus only 13% of black male football players are getting a business degree. Now, I'm not saying that this is bad, but these trends do line up with what I think is academic clustering, or at least kind of seeing some trends that I'm not necessarily saying it's bad, but I think every campus should be looking at this, because what would be great is if we could get an outcome-based model, a survey of primarily, I think, black males and white males in these social sciences. Are they using them? I think liberal arts and social science majors are great. Those are the kind of lumped in the same categories for these purposes. But are they actually finding them helpful to get jobs? Now, business has long been one of, if not the top choice for majors, especially with males. Yet we're seeing it a lot higher rates in white male athletes versus black male athletes. And I'd like to see if we could run some type of, similar to what Gallup does. So Gallup is a higher education. They have their own kind of surveys that they send out, teamed up with Purdue University, where they can do outcome-based from once you're separated from the university. So you're in the workforce, and they'll kind of do a quality of education, quality of campus life, looking back. I would love to be able to do that, and I'm going to make the proposal that AdvisEdu can do that for schools, possibly for the NCAA. Just kind of look and see what they're thinking, maybe 2, 3, 4 years removed from college athletics, and see, what do you think about that social science? Do you wish you would have gone into something else? And then for both black males and white males, because I'm not a big proponent that a major is the only thing that matters about the education experience, but it does if you're majoring in something you're not interested in. And based on my research in the past and my concerns is that the reason that we're seeing these changes is if you're going to be in business, it's a lot harder to be eligible in it. So if you're social science, it's a lot easier to be eligible and stay eligible, and yes, eventually graduate. And I think we do a great job with NCAA as far as progress towards a degree to get across that finish line, but we're doing such a good job, and black male student athletes are actually graduating higher rates than ever, and I commend the NCAA schools for that. But we need to now go back a step and look and see, are they majoring in what they want, or is it because they are either underperforming in a certain major so they have to change the social science? Are they being steered into one of these majors that maybe they're just doing it for the more allowable electives where you can throw in any class and without too much risk of eligibility. And I'd like to know, do any of them want to be business or a different major, but they just weren't able to? And, the results of that could be something we don't want to hear and read. But I think it's important, if we're going to be innovators in higher education and really focus on the academic experience of the student athlete, is make sure that they were satisfied looking back. Now, I do think everyone has to take advantage of the opportunity while they're in college to kind of explore interests. And you need to stick up for, if you want to do this major, then let's do it. And, there are waivers built in for NCAA progress towards degree waivers. I'd like to see that expanded to, instead of just a waiver, maybe a program. A waiver sounds kind of like you're going to apply, you're not going to get it. I just want to find a way that we can make sure that these student athletes, white males, black males, every ethnicity, every gender, is majoring in what they want to do while they're on campus. And the eligibility is not risking that, but we also do need to make sure we have barriers where it's not going to put them behind where they're not going to graduate. Because at the end of the day, getting the degree is more important, at least if you're trying to get a job and you're going to focus on the research, than what you majored in. Employers want to see that you have that degree. They're not necessarily focused on what the degree is. Now, yeah, some it does matter, but not a lot of job applications want some college but no degree. So the degree matters, but now that we're doing so good at tracking the degrees and getting students across the finish line, graduation rates exceeding expectations, let's go back a step, make sure they're majoring in what they want to do. So I'm not confident in saying that it is a problem, but I do want to kind of offer up some solutions on researching different majors and getting off to a good start of knowing that you want to try this major, the curriculum involved. And so I'm going to talk about things that I think have gotten in the way of that, and maybe things that either lead to choosing a major you're not really interested in or academic clustering, just for the sake of assuming that those stretched out numbers is a sign of academic clustering. I don't have evidence to prove that. It's all a hunch based on doing this for over 3 years as my only job, and things I still study to this day. So first off, progress towards degree. So the NCAA policy, progress towards degree, very much a fan of this policy. So I don't want to sound like I'm not. I actually think it's a great policy that is needed, but it does explain things. So whenever you're saying you need 40%, you need 60, you need 80, the NCAA gives you 5 years. So they give you 5 years versus, what traditionally we think of as 4. And we see a lot of student athletes graduating in 3 years. Now, will transferring improve, progress towards degree? I think so, but it could potentially steer students to stop really worrying about what major they want and just trying to get that degree done. So I hope that's not the case, but I do think majoring eligibility, as we hear it, is focused on students being eligible in a certain major and not asking them to worry about whether they want to remain there as a student and just be ineligible. So if you ask them basically to choose between their major or their eligibility, 99 out of 99 times, the eligibility piece is going to be more important to the athlete. You're talking about an 18 to 22-year-old. You're saying that I'm here to play my sport, and if I really want to do business, I can, but I'm not going to be eligible in it most likely. But if I switch to social science and just stay with that, I can still do business classes, and but I won't have that risk of being ineligible. And I'll get my degree quicker probably, and I can possibly transfer as a grad transfer. So yeah, that most likely is going to be the thing that they choose. Now the other thing is, and I hope this doesn't happen a lot, but I do think sometimes coaches have a system of thinking that they know what major is best for their students. So they've been here 10, 15 years. They know the curriculum. They see the grade reports. And they also see the academic profile of the students they're recruiting. So if you're a smart student, then yeah, they're probably going to say they can do whatever. Now, if you come in and you're a special admit, which don't get me started on that. I don't think every school should be bringing in special admits just because of their athlete status. I do think it's part of some universities' missions to bring in a lot of students, regardless of their academic ability, and because they think they have the support there, and I support that. But I do think coaches get in this thinking that I know my kids that I'm recruiting, okay, and I know they need this amount of study hall hours before ever sitting in a classroom. They look at their academic data from high school or what school they were at. Was it inner city, for example? So maybe they make assumptions, and they could be accurate assumptions, but I do think they have this system of thinking that they know the best majors, the best classes, and some majors might be off limits. So I think as an institutional leader, you need to have that conversation on your campus and make it very clear. Every student athlete is going to be able to pursue any major on this campus. Now, if it gets to year 2, semester 3, at the end of 3 semesters and they're not going to make it, here's the good thing. That 40% of progress towards degree, a lot of those majors do come with allowable electives. So why not try the challenging major if there's one that you really want on campus? Let your student athletes take that, challenge themselves, and then they're going to know after 3 semesters, if they decide, I don't think I can maintain this, then okay, let's have that conversation. Maybe they need to change their major and have that conversation. But let's not limit based on assumptions that they can't pursue any major on campus. And that's one thing that I hope we don't do. Another thing is the lack of exposure to researching different majors in the first place. So outside of where you going to school, the next question is, what's your major? Many of you listening to this would probably ask that same thing when you stepped on campus. Now think about a student athlete. You're entrenched in a very thorough recruiting process, right? So you might be looking at different schools and you're so focused on the sport aspect that maybe you're not getting the full exposure to the different majors that campus offers. And then K-12 system doesn't do a great job of exposing students to majors because it's not necessarily their responsibility. Their responsibility is to educate the general public all the way from kindergarten all the way through senior year of high school, get your high school degree, and then hope that you get to college and that they've done a good enough job with you, educating you that you can get accepted. But we focus a lot in high school on what school you're going to go to, but not necessarily the majors. The other thing is major assessments are pretty inaccurate. So if you ask anyone that's taken a major assessment, ask even your campus center, not a lot of applause for the assessments saying that, this is great, this is exactly what I want to do. I think a lot of things can be done great by a computer, but I think one of the things is that it cannot do is necessarily tell you what major you should do. Now, I do believe in reverse engineering a career, but I think we need to try and set up some programming to help students realize as they're coming into college, so while they're in that gap between high school and college, and maybe even in the recruiting process, is talk about the majors, what the curriculum in these majors is. So how many math classes am I going to take for exercise science or engineering? It all sounds great. I want to be an engineer. But if you're horrible at math, then you might have wasted your entire time of what you could have been researching 2 or 3 other majors as backups because you're so set on engineering, and then you get there and you realize, well, I don't like math, I can't do engineering. So we just need to do a better job at preparing students to know what they want to major in. And unfortunately, teammates and parents have influence on the students the most because they're now their friends or they're still their parents, and what they majored in college, and so they have a limited exposure to different careers, and teammates do cluster based on interest. They're going to give their opinions on the majors, the classes, the professors, etc. So there's just a lot of challenges that steer majors, not necessarily steer, but they limit. And what colleges should be doing, review their own numbers of majors between athletes and the general student, because I do think you're going to find some conversation pieces. So soon the institutional performance program, the IPP platform, will allow schools to actually measure, compare their own general student body against degrees. And if you don't know what IPP is, ask your athletic department, because they have an account on there, and the IPP shows a lot of great academic tools that compares your whole university, compares to like-minded institutions in your athletic conference on a lot of different variables. So we'll get to that later. But ask specifically targeted major questions in the exit interview process. That is another one. So schools are required to do an exit interview of some kind with their student athletes. And even the NCAA does a goals study, I believe every 5 years, where they actually target a big population of student athletes. And they do ask them things about your academic major and your courses. But let's start asking in the exit interview process, ask questions about, how did you choose your major? Was there another major that you were wanting that you just couldn't do? And then another one is, have AdvisEdu. That's me and my company doing an outcome satisfaction survey of former athletes in questionable majors. So if you have, social sciences that you don't see a lot of your student body taking, but you see a lot of student athletes, why don't we follow up with them with the best opportunity we can to try and find out about these majors? Is ask them, was this something that you were really interested in? What are you doing now? Did it require that degree? Do you have any regrets? And was NCAA academic policy or coach influence potentially the reason you chose a certain major? Or was it transfer credit, something like that? And then to wrap up, make it clear to coaches that no student athlete should be discouraged from attempting the major they want to pursue. So I talked about the first 2 years should be the exploration process, because 40%, it's very difficult to major in anything and not reach 40% of a degree. You have allowable electives, even the business, you could still find. I found that business for students that were struggling, it wasn't really until that 60% line where they started having problems getting to that 60% with the business. So I think even with the 40%, you're only looking at 48 credit hours. So as long as they're passing the 24 per year, they're fine. I think even if you change your major twice in the first 2 years, it's going to be very difficult to be ineligible going into the third year. So let's let them try any major on campus. Should not be off limit. And then let's establish a culture of career center programming on major exploration. So let's work with our career center, our orientation staff, maybe the recruiting staff, whether it's athlete recruiting or academic recruiting, the materials that you send out. For one, let's stop asking what major they're going to be while they're still in high school. So let's not put that in the ed. I think that should be taken off the application process. I know why schools put it on the application process so they can kind of, see what's popular, how much faculty they need, how many classes they need to offer. But I do think it does a big disservice to students thinking that they're going to major in this, but they don't do enough research. So let's put some information packets together when we send all this information to student athletes, students in general, about different majors on campus, and then how to review. So give them some best practices, how to reverse engineer a career, what to do as far as informational interviewing, talk to people in different fields, and just what are you interested in? And so those are some things that I think we should be doing at the college institutional level to make sure that we're not making anything off limits to student athletes. So that wraps up today's topic for the podcast. Join me for the next episode. It is going to be what if colleges adopted NCAA academic performance program for all students. So this is going to be an episode more about higher education data points and measurements to kind of stretch it to see what if every college did APR and the graduation success that factors in transfers. What would it look like if we had all of higher ed doing that? And why I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of it, what the challenges are, and then what we could actually learn from that data. And maybe it could happen. So thanks for listening to the podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Travis Higher Ed. Visit the website, advisedu.com. That's AdviseEdu.com. And learn more about the projects we're working on. The project that is coming out next is the research I did on kind of the athletic academic advisor perspective on NCAA Division I academic policy. That is going to be spotlighted as the May spotlight in the upcoming N4A, which is the professional development group for athletic academic advisors. Someone nominated that research that I'm doing to be profiled, so you'll hear about that, but I will have those results leading up to convention here in June. The goal is to do both publish the paper on the website. Not going to do a traditional publishing route. It's not really my style, but I'm going to share that. I'm going to share the entire data with you, and then I'm going to go through it in its own podcast episode leading up to convention to kind of hope to have some more conversations once we're in Washington, D.C. For the N4A convention at the end of June. So thank you again, and I'll talk to you next time on the Travis Talks Education Podcast.